It's pretty difficult making an underrated card video for any of the e-card sets just because, well, all the cards are underrated in a greater scope of things. I talk about this in a lot more detail in the e-card overview video, so if you haven't watched that one, make sure you check it out. But essentially, the e-card sets exist in their own little bubble that's between a very powerful block of Pokemon and trainers in Neo, and then another block of very powerful Pokemon and trainers in the EX era, Ruby and Sapphire. But Expedition, Aquapolis, and Skyridge themselves don't actually have that many powerful Pokemon or standout trainer cards. They're more of transitionary sets where supporters were being introduced, new card formats were being introduced, new mechanics and gameplay options like with Pokebodies. On top of all of that, Wizards of the Coast had lost their license to the Pokemon TCG, so they weren't putting a whole lot of effort into marketing anymore. As you can tell by the booster box artwork, they've just slapped 3 Pokemon on there. It's a huge downgrade from what they had previously done, all the way up through base Neo. To be fair, the Japanese side of things were doing pretty much the same, where they had just copied and pasted a bunch of Ken Sugimori artwork. Overall, just a very weird period of time for the Pokemon TCG. Usually with these underrated videos, we start with the best cards from the set, so that we have a standard to go by on what is considered underrated. In the case of E-Card, it's a little safer to say that these cards are accurately rated, as their quality is kind of in relation to the context of the E-Card format, which was never an official format, more of a specialty thing, rather than their greater scope. Because if you are comparing any of the E-Cards to the overall like base Neo format or even EX format that they were a part of, then they're all underrated. Based on their ability to be the central figure in a deck, I would say that some of the best cards in Expedition are Charizard, Venusaur, Gengar, Typhlosion, Ninetales, Alakazam, Vileplume, and maybe Tyranitar. I was a little bit iffy about putting Tyranitar on this list. Ultimately, I said no. For their roles as support Pokemon, I would also say that Clefable and Machamp make the list. I mean, come on, Machamp lets you scry for every turn. I also have to give a huge shout out to some of the staple supporters introduced in Expedition, like Professor Elm's training method, Professor Oak's research, Copycat, and Pokemon Nurse. When it came to setting the standard for what a supporter should be, these cards just knocked it out of the park. If the cards themselves haven't been reprinted, then supporters like them have been printed and reprinted over and over and over, and are still being reprinted today. For worst card in Expedition, I gotta give it to Tauros. I know that the E-cards really tried to nerf big basics, but even having 70 HP, you had to go and give Tauros a retreat cost of 2, give it 2 attacks that both cost 2 colorless, and if you're playing E-card or Neo 1, double colorless doesn't exist, so you're not attacking on your first turn. Both attacks are maxing out at 30 damage, and both attacks require you to flip a coin. In either case, you're probably gonna end up with a negative consequence of either not doing any damage to your opponent or doing 20 damage to yourself. It's a bad card, and if you want to dispute that, then let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you think the worst card in Expedition is. Let's get the countdown started with the card I think is the 8th most underrated in Expedition, and it's Kingler. Mainly because I love its potential for a meme deck. Yeah, it's not going to be usable because it's so wildly inconsistent, but just imagine those matches where on turn 2 you evolve up into Kingler, you use Bubble, hit heads, paralyze your opponent, they can't do anything on their turn, they do whatever and then pass back to you. Turn 3, you use Giant Claw and knock out their 80 HP active. Kingler is a card that you play purely for fun over viability, but you pair Kingler with something like Dugong from E-card and you've got yourself a solid little rogue water deck. Stage 1 water control wouldn't be bad. Next on the list is Mary's Impulse for kind of the same reasons as Kingler, where if you're hitting heads on coin flips, it's a great card. But realistically, 50% of the time, you're playing this supporter and getting no cards. It only makes the list for its ability to draw you an insane amount of cards in those rare instances where you just keep flipping heads over and over again and end up drawing 8 or 10 cards. And those instances do happen. I've been on the receiving end of 640 damage from a continuous headbutt before. Plus, I just love any cards that use Ken Sugimori's concept artwork or storytelling artwork from Gen 2. Pretty sure every time I do one of these videos for a set that has Rapidash in it, Rapidash makes the list. Another underutilized Stage 1 in my opinion. It's got a decent attack for 2 colorless energy, meaning that it is splashable as a coverage card, and 40 damage for 3 energy, still not bad, especially off of a Pokemon that has free retreat, so as soon as it gets some damage counters on it, it can get the hell out of there and back onto the bench. It does get overshadowed by the Aquapolis Rapidash, which has the same type of energy configuration. It's also splashable, it also has free retreat off of 70 HP. It's just that it's a little more versatile in what it can do off of coin flips, but if you don't want to rely on coin flips, then the Expedition Rapidash is preferable. It's completely up to playstyle, really. I prefer guaranteed damage, so I actually like the Expedition Rapidash more, and the more I've played with both of these cards, I continue to prefer the Expedition one for that reason. Next up is Poliwrath, which I think gets overlooked a lot just because there are so many other efficient water types that are used for coverage against fire type decks, and Poliwrath as a stage 2 with a 4 energy attack, yeah, it's not as usable. But it's really built to be a surprise late game sweeper in a mono water deck, which you really don't see across formats unless it's for Alligator or Blastoise. As soon as you evolve up a benched Poliwhirl into Poliwrath, you can flip a coins and see if you can get off the plunge. If you hit heads, then you can take all of the energy attached to your active Pokemon, put them on Poliwrath, and move Poliwrath into the active position, which can really throw your opponent off guard if they think that they're going to be able to knock out your active next turn, but instead you just drop a Poliwrath, get it into the active position, and hit for 40 plus damage. Even if you don't hit that initial heads, you can still try for another plunge next turn, which does take away the surprise factor, but if Poliwrath is the core of your deck, or if you're just running a Tadpole deck in general, you can plunge back and forth between different Poliwraths depending on how often you're able to hit those heads, which is a great way to get your active Pokemon out of any special conditions. Since plunge is an ability that you're going to be using from the bench, it's a great way to work around Poliwrath's retreat cost. Unfortunately, that is a lot of work to just get to the point in the game where you have enough energy to just move around willy-nilly, and you also have to rely on those coin flips in order to fully utilize plunge. I still like it though, I think it's a neat card. Another overlooked stage 1 is Arbok, and it can combo with itself. It can get the guaranteed poison and then follow up with poison reaction for 40 damage off of 2 energy, plus the poison damage that's going on between turns. It can stack up. Ekans can also inflict poison, though it is off of a coin flip, so you can technically poison your first turn attacking, evolve up into Arbok, and hit for heavier damage on your second turn attacking. So 10 damage from Ekans, and let's say that you do hit heads and your opponent's poison, they're going to take 10 more damage between turns, stacking up as 20. If they keep that same Pokemon in the active position, that stacks to 30. And then when you evolve up into Arbok, you're going to be hitting them for 40, which stacks up to 70. And then between turns again, they're going to take 10 more. So you're looking at dealing 80 damage across 2 turns, which is pretty good. Not good enough to build a deck around, but it makes a great partner for other grass types or anything else that's inflicting poison. Namely Beedrill, because one weakness in Beedrill decks is that its Needle Rush attack is inconsistent. So what you can do is evolve your active Kakuna into a Beedrill, paralyze and poison your opponent, and then free retreat into Arbok and hit for 40 damage for only 2 energy. That's guaranteed 40 damage. Your Speedrill builds don't like using any partner Pokemon because that messes up the ball engine and actually getting those Kakunas and Beedrills as quickly as possible, but if you want to rely on the supporter engine instead, putting in a 3-3 line or a 4-4 line of Arbok is a way to get more consistency out of the deck, and also a way to not give your opponent so many free cards off of mulligans. Yet another stage 1. Raichu makes the list because it's just a heavily nerfed version of Rocket Zapdos. Plasma's going to deal 10 damage, and if you hit the coin flip, you're going to be able to take a lightning energy out of your discard and attach it to Raichu, which is going to help you power up for a shock bolt next turn, in which you're going to have to discard all lightning energy off of Raichu. Now 60 damage for 3 energy is good. With built-in acceleration, even better. Plus with Shock Bolt, if your third energy is just something like a Cyclone energy or a Warp energy, you're not going to have to discard it. You're only going to have to discard 2 of those 3 energies. Raichu does have some pretty good partners in the format, namely Ampharos and Electabuzz. It's just overall electric types weren't all that great in the metagame, which is why when you do see Ampharos and Electabuzz, it's in non-electric type decks most of the time. Take the coin flip out of Plasma, you got yourself a great card here rather than just an okay card. Still usable though, especially if you're looking to craft a deck that can counter water. Maybe give Raichu a chance. I've already mentioned Electabuzz, and it's on the list. I love this card. I think it is incredibly underused and underrated. For one colorless, you can use Energy Draw, search your deck for an energy, and attach it to Electabuzz. No coin flip required, grab any basic energy. And then on your next turn, Reflect Energy is going to deal 20 damage for 2 energy, and you can take one of your basic energy cards attached to Electabuzz and move it to one of the Pokemon on your bench. So by itself, Electabuzz is accelerating energy onto itself and then passing on that energy to your bench to set up all of your big attackers, while also dealing 20 damage, mind you. So that's all pretty good, whatever. The reason that Electabuzz is so underrated is because this is how you make big basics work for eReader. Your legendary birds all have a Pokebody that prevents you from attaching their energy type to them directly from your hand, but it doesn't say anything about attaching them from Electabuzz. As long as they're on your bench, you can power them up through Electabuzz while also dealing that 20 damage, instead of having to rely on those colorless 1 energy attacks to power up these birds. Same kind of thing goes for the legendary Beast Trio, in that their Pokebodies make it more difficult to get their energy type onto them whenever you are attaching straight from your hand. But with the help of Electabuzz, you are able to just get those energy out of your deck and then transfer them over to one of these big basics on your bench. And because Electabuzz's energy draw lets you choose the basic energy type that you want to attach, basically a free energy search off of an attack, then you're able to run multiple types of these beasts because their attacks only require 1 specific energy. You could run a legendary beast deck with Electabuzz and be able to run all 3 types of energy pretty easily. Electabuzz is basically your way of building decks around legendary Pokemon, because you can even imagine a Neo Genesis Lugia sitting on your bench, and you just grab energy straight out of your deck and attach to that Lugia on your bench. It's the easiest way to power one up, probably. Electabuzz is very much just a very powerful energy conduit, and it needs more love. It needs more recognition for what it can actually do for electric decks and multicolored decks and for big basic decks. That being said, it is in a lot of builds, which is why it's not number 1 on this list, is that a lot of people do recognize how useful it can be. But let's move on to the card that is number 1 on this list. Charizard. Nope, not even joking, it is Charizard. We already established with Raichu that 60 damage for 3 energies, pretty darn good. And Charizard can accomplish that consistently turn after turn with Flamethrower. The card's greatest strength is its simplicity. You evolve up into Charizard, you use Flamethrower, deal 60 damage, discard an energy. Next turn, you attach an energy, you use Flamethrower, deal 60 damage, discard an energy. That's it. Very limited setup, you don't have to rely on combos or support Pokemon. It's easy to compare this Charizard to its uglier brother in Expedition and go, well, ugly Charizard has higher HP, its Poke Power allows it to utilize boost energy and get off a Scorching Whirlwind attack faster, and that's going to be dealing 120 damage. You know, and it combos well with Venusaur, it's got its own deck archetype, yes. All of that is true, but that's just a bunch of extra bullshit. If I'm running Charizard, it's usually just because I want to OHKO grass types. And one of these Charizards is way more efficient at doing that than the other. If you're playing Neo on or WotC 20, then there may be more opportunities to deal 120 damage and that be the perfect amount for an OHKO, but most of the time, you don't need to deal that much damage. That's overkill, especially if you're hitting for weakness. If I'm just looking to knock out a Scizor, Charizard's Flamethrower attack is one of the fastest, most efficient ways to do so. You can still do it with a Scorching Whirlwind, but you're gonna take a lot of extra turns and so much more setup just to get those 4 energy on there and get the attack off to deal 240 damage, which is completely unnecessary. I understand that the 100 HP Charizard is more of the rogue, anti-meta choice. All I'm saying is give it a little more attention than what it's getting, because Ugly Charizard with 120 HP is a lot more difficult to use, but because of the big numbers that it can put up, it gets all of the focus. I almost feel like it's back in base set when people would compare Charizard to Ninetales and argue over which is better. It's like, it's clearly Ninetales. Yeah, the damage output isn't as high, but it's easier to use. Those are all of the cards from Expedition that I feel are underrated. Let me know where you agree, and let me know where you disagree down there in the comments. Also, let me know if there's any cards that you think should have made the list. Thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying all of the eReader e-card content that's been going up here lately. Social media links are down in the description. I'll see you next video.